In 2008, Los Angeles did a traffic study here on Zelza Avenue. The city's Department of Transportation found most drivers were speeding, and the crash rate was higher than expected. So they decided to raise the speed limit. Later, they did another traffic study. Many drivers were still speeding, and so they raised the speed limit again. These changes weren't by accident. They're based on an archaic rule that basically lets drivers determine their own speed limits. It's called the 85th percentile rule. You've probably never heard of it, but urban planners sure have.
I could talk forever on its place in the world.
It's become the most common rule used in setting speed limits.
It's again this terrible feedback loop and cycle that results in a street being unsafe.
So this is how it works. Engineers measure how fast cars are driving on a street, and whatever speed 85% of cars are driving under is the new speed limit. Seriously, that's it. And you can imagine there are a couple big problems with this approach, especially in cities. For one, it ignores everyone who isn't driving. And it creates this feedback loop. People drive faster, you raise the speed limit. People drive faster, you raise the speed limit. People drive faster. Okay, so you can even hear this play out in Sammy Hagar's famous speeding anthem in 1984. And in 2001. Today, the 85th percentile rule is everywhere. But it wasn't always like that. The rule dates all the way back to the 1930s, when companies were starting to produce cars that could go way faster than before. To keep up with the technology, cities and states basically had to invent speed limits on the fly. And yeah, they had no idea how to do that. So the rule started kind of as a thought experiment. If you assume most people drive at a speed they feel is safe, maybe you could just look at what most drivers are doing and use that to find the real safe speed.
An old ITE document described it as drivers voting with their feet, and that's really what it ends up becoming.
Rather than trying to figure out, well, with this curve and this width of lane and this much traffic, what would be the safe traffic? Let's just measure people with unregulated traffic and assume that about 85% of the people would be going at or below a reasonable speed.
At the time, the rule was for wide rural highways, not cities. And basically everyone saw this just as a starting point. You also have to check back to make sure the speeds are actually safe.
So over time, this reasonable place to kind of start and then do some follow-up studies to see if it was working out started to become from a rule of thumb to a rule.
The 85th percentile rule really became ingrained in the 60s, after a popular study gave it some scientific clout. Researchers took a bunch of rural highway crash reports and looked at how fast each driver was going, and they came up with this curve. It basically says it's dangerous to drive too fast, and it's also dangerous to drive too slow. So the 85th percentile speed, the speed right around here, traffic planners started thinking of that as the safe speed. Here's the problem. That logic hasn't held up well. For one, it didn't account for turning cars, which make up most of these slow-speed crashes. Look at how the crash rate drops when you remove turning cars. Next, speeding is dangerous. Fast drivers just can't see their surroundings as well, and they take longer to stop in an emergency. And a high-speed crash is way more likely to kill a pedestrian than a slower one. Finally, the study only looked at rural highways.
Cities aren't like that. Cities are where people interact.
And when you use an approach that is only based on the cars and the trucks on the street, then you're not accounting for the other users on the street, and you're not accounting for the users who might come to the street if the speeds were safer and it felt like a more comfortable place to walk and bike.
There's so much wrong with this rule that the federal government's own speed limit guidebook now has this little footnote. The original research between speed and safety, which purported that the safest travel speed is the 85th percentile speed, is dated research and may not be valid under scrutiny. But despite all the rule's flaws, cities have struggled to find a good alternative. Enter this. It's a new guidebook from NACTO, an urban transportation coalition that focuses on designing streets for walking, biking, and transit. The guidebook lays out a new way to set speed limits. Start by examining the road's traffic speeds and crash history. Also, look at all the ways a crash might happen in the future by measuring activity level, how busy a certain street is, and conflict density, how often pedestrians, cyclists, or cars could cross each other's paths. Remember that street from earlier that kept raising the speed limit, Zelza Avenue? According to this method, its speed limit should be 20 miles per hour, not 45. Now this brings up an interesting point. Zelza is a big 4-lane road. It's designed for people to drive fast. On a road like that, just changing the speed limit might not do much. You need to change the design too. And realistically, that's what NACTO sees as the path forward.
By lowering speed limits and using design changes, you'll encourage people in your city to ride a bike to work, to walk to work, to take transit. And that is what makes a city more environmentally sustainable than a city that encourages people to drive in their cars and to drive fast.